what I was doing at the time was exactly this around data stewardship. So Richard, are you a full-time data steward? Am I right?
Kind of. More than I used to be, I suppose. So I started off as a research software engineer, so my background is in zoology, but I then switched to software engineering, working on biodiversity data at UKCEH, and ended up managing that database and writing applications to start publishing that data online. I then moved to cancer research, where again, working primarily as a software engineer, but the role evolved and I started to take on more of the data management responsibilities and started managing the data management team there. So it's kind of my career has sort of shifted away from the software engineering and more into the data stewardship side. So now, yeah, I'm much more fully engaged in the data stewardship side. So again, I've got a small team, and yeah, we are there to support our researchers, looking after and making the most of their data.
Brilliant. Alison, would you say you were a data steward and how you got into your current role?
It's interesting because, like Richard said, I think a lot of us in these data stewardship or research data management roles have come to these roles through weird and wonderful routes. As you say, it was not a job that was sort of advertised 20 years ago. I was a biology degree, and then I did a bioinformatics master's and went to work at the EBI. And I moved ever further and further away from biology and more into data standardization, data stewardship, research data management. My official title is not data steward, it's project lead, or maybe knowledge engineer. Susanna made that one up. I was very proud of her for making that one up because it made me sound really special. But it does have its roots still in data stewardship and training, and that is a lot of what I do is less about particular data sets and the stewardship of them, and more about the outreach and engagement and improvement of provision for data stewards and trainers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. Eva, how did you get into stewardship? I think you're like me in that you do some stewardship, but you wouldn't call yourself a data steward.
Yeah, that's it. So as part of the role analyzing data, so we offer services for data analysis, software development, and part of it is to get the data, put it in usable format, and then make sure that data is secure, it can be reused, and try to advocate as well for fair principles that these are not commonly adhered to by the groups that we work with. So we work a lot with clinicians, with biomedical scientists that might not be as exposed to these things as we would like to. So part of our job is as well to try to preach of what we think are best practices, but as well continuously learning, because as you all have shared, these were not professions that existed and that there was formal training in the different passages of education. So one is self-taught. So there are gaps that once one realizes continuous learning. So yeah, I think I got here and I'm on a mixture of fear and imposter syndrome to trying to do better. Yeah.
I think we had this with the fair data stewardship that we ran from ELIXIR. As a lot of people were coming in doing a large research component within their job, but wouldn't actually be calling themselves data stewards. But I mean, my story is pretty similar. So I worked. Well, I've always worked as a bioinformatician, so someone programming and managing biological data, but in my case, genomics. So I started off in Cambridge at the Sanger Institute, which was one of the international sites where the human genome was sequenced. So I joined just as the first draft was released and worked as a programmer with transcriptomic data. So data which tells us which genes are on or off within the cell at any one time. So over 13 years, I just worked my way through a number of positions in bioinformatics and ended up heading up genotyping, where we ran the robots for the large genotyping studies, including the 1,000 Genome Project and what was the UK 10K at the time. And then I wanted to move somewhere else and got a new job in Cardiff. We're working as a digital RTP, specialising in genomic data. And then been here ever since. So I've always really worked with large data sets, with many files, with lots of metadata on everything. So I reckon at least half of what I've always done has really been managing data. And I think, Alison, this is how I know you from the Wellcome Trust site. I think you were at EBI at the same time I was at Sanger, and I remember seeing you on a call and thinking, oh, I know you.
It's funny how we get around. I think the network of people that have at some point been on the Genome campus is astonishingly large, surprisingly large. And I was just thinking we definitely had some overlap there if you were at Sanger when they were finishing off the human genome draft.
Yeah. Okay, so should we start our Halloween special, which is our data stories? I've got a slide I would like to share, so I'll just get this up. We are working with Mentimeter, so for anyone on the call that would actually like to join us with this, I've got a slide here where you can get the QR code if you want to, but you can also go to the menti.com and I've given the code there as well. So what I'll do is I'll just post this into chat as we get going. In fact, I'll post it into chat now. So we like the idea of really talking about some of the data experience we've had, and just we all did this independently, and it looks like we've got some similarity across this. But what we're going to be doing is 2 lies and a truth. So out of these 3 that Richard has, 2 are lies and 1's truth. Am I right, Richard? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to take us through this, Richard? Let's see.
Okay. Yeah, so the first one, well, checking through an archive of nitrogen use data. So nitrogen use is looking at how nitrogen moves through an agricultural system. I've found various personal files in the archive from the original research team, including their lottery syndicate numbers. The second one, as an example of poor data publishing practice, I quoted a tabular data set to one of our researchers where it had been published as a supplementary file as PDF, not realizing that the person I was talking to was also the author of that paper. And then finally, we once had to retract a paper from one of our research teams because it had been challenged and we were not able to find the primary data files used for the analysis.
Wow, okay. Here we go. Here's the Mentimeter. Right, we've got a popular.
Oh, it's interesting to see which way it's going.
We got a nice response as well.
I think maybe they all want number 3 to be the one.
Yeah.
So I think we're pretty steady now. So Richard, we've got lost primary data.
Yeah, unfortunately not. It's number 1, it's the lottery numbers, amongst a whole lot of other personal data, which probably shouldn't have been in there. So it's not the first time we've come across finding personal data in with research data. Yeah, the second one, the PDF, that is something that we actually do use in some of our training as an example of how not to publish data. And the third one, it's kind of a threat that we have used in the past, because we have had a couple of cases where papers have been retracted, but not for this reason. but we're looking at, when you look at some of the retraction stats, the not being able to find primary data is one of the reasons things do get retracted. So it's, again, it's something that we try and use to incentivize people to do good data management.
So I think I see this all the time, is that people will keep data, but there's no real awareness that sometimes they can't publish if they don't have it. I mean, how much of what you publish actually requires the primary data to be there? What percentage do you think?
Yeah, it's quite a mixed bag, and it depends on the type of data. So a lot of the omicsy stuff, I think that would tend to be published in FastA, FastQ files, those sorts of things, which I'm less experienced about. I suppose as a more raw format would get published. But when it comes to a lot of the more agricultural data, field data that we collect, that usually does undergo processing. So, for example, if we're collecting things like yield data or phenotyping images, those will always go through some processing steps before being published, because more than anything as a convenience, because you don't really want to have people transforming raw yields as they come off a tractor, for example, because you need a lot of other information about the plot area, the width of the combine, just to get to a standard tons per hectare, which is what everybody is really after. So it depends on the type of data.
So you're working with agricultural data, is that right?
Yeah, the bulk of what I deal with is certainly the sort of field experimental data. So it covers a lot of soil data. So it can be soil chemistry and physics, which is generated by a whole range of different methods. So you have traditional wet chemistry, and a lot of increasingly dry chemistry as well now. A lot of biodiversity data, so from farm surveys, a lot of crop phenotyping data. We also have a lot of sensor data as well. And again, that's another case where we usually sanitize that data, sensor data, before we publish it. So there's always a QC step in there. Let the raw data out.
Are there public repositories for this?
No, that's one of the. So there's not community repositories. There is the NERC EIDC, but that's really a general repository aimed at environmental data. We publish some of the data on our own in-house platforms because they are related to specific research infrastructures. But otherwise, a lot of the data either doesn't get published, or it goes to places like Zenodo or Figshare.
I find that very interesting. I mean, is there any implication if you're talking about transparency or fairness or openness, if you always produce, because everyone wants to see the tons per acre, or everyone wants to see the slightly rejigged information, just to make it more easy to understand. Is there ever any consequence, though? What's the likelihood of needing to go back to that underlying raw data that then it disappears?
So I think that the biggest obstacle is in the secondary reuse of the data. So what we tend to find is the data is published, but the people who are really interested in the downstream reuse of the data are modelers. And they struggle particularly with a lot of the soil data, because the interpretation and the reuse of the soil data really depends on the sampling and the analytical methods that have been used to generate that data. There's several different ways of measuring things like as simple as soil pH, seemingly relatively simple variables like that. And yeah, when you look at something like soil carbon, there's even more ways of doing it. So the downstream interoperability of the data is a real challenge.
It's this reusability. How often will it get reused? How will it be affected if you modify it slightly before? I just find it interesting. And thank you for talking about it.
Yeah, I think if there's more standardization, there would be a lot more reuse.
I guess that's where you have to head.
Big barrier.
Yeah.
I mean, interoperability comes in your data in the PDF as well. I remember sitting down with the FAIR principles, I think 2 or 3 years ago, trying to work out what the F, the A, the I, and the R were, and
Yeah.
just the interoperability. It can mean a lot of things, but something isn't interoperable, you can't load something from a PDF into R, for
Right.
example.
The
Yeah.
PDF is horrible in terms of reuse interoperability. Yeah, a PDF is awful. I saw a paper recently that was doing a review of environmental science terminologies, and they found like 500 that were at least related to environmental sciences. And that's how it seems like a lot.
Yeah, it's so agriculture in particular, I think it's one of those areas that's sort of fallen through the cracks a bit because partly I think because it covers so many different domains. So a lot of our research sits across BBSRC and NERC sort of funded work. And on the more purely environmental side, so atmospheric data, that kind of thing, there are good repositories for that, which are supported by NERC. But when you go down to the field experimental level and you're collecting phenotyping data, I know that there's initiatives at the moment looking at that, but at the moment, actually getting that stuff published in a meaningful way. So there are standards like MIAPI, minimum information about a plant phenotyping experiment, but there aren't the repositories yet which are using those sorts of standards to make that data more readily accessible.
I've always liked the NERC data management plan as well, because you kind of do it after, am I right? You put a lot of the granularity in after it's actually been funded, and you almost compose a table, which is 1 line per data set that you're going to be producing.
Yes, yeah, NERC have a slightly different approach to the other research council. So at the proposal stage, your data management plan is very lightweight. It's just very much an outline. But once you get funded, then the expectation is you produce a much more detailed data management plan outlining the outputs that you're going to deliver in that project.
Great. Alison, I think it's you next. Thank you,
Oh,
Rich.
exciting.
Thank you.
Let's move. I got this as large as I can. Yes, I have. Alison, here are your horrors.
Yes, my horrors. So in my first job, I was hired as a database programmer, having just finished that bioinformatics master's that I spoke about earlier. And I came to find that it was using, I'd gotten my lovely shiny master's using Java, and I was all excited about Java and object-oriented programming, and I was ready to use it. And then I was faced with a horrible COBOL code set. The second one is about my PhD, which I did after that first job. And that's saying that despite the fact I did the PhD in a computer science department and I was already working on interoperability and semantics and things like this, I still somehow managed in the intervening years to completely lose all of my data and my software. It's all I've got is in my thesis printout, which is a bit of a personal horror story, if it's true. And if I haven't just, put it into GitHub repo and I'm lying. The last one I could be lying about is the use of commas. So I know it's a comma separated file, but you get the commas within the string text within each cell, and it causes havoc. And this was a previous job where we were given CSV files and we tried to parse it, and it caused all sorts of errors. And so ever since all the way up to my current job, everyone is determined to use pipes. So
Great. Let's go to voting.
interesting. It's like a little battle there. I guess I could vote. Shall I vote incorrectly? or maybe I voted correctly.
Right, so it looks like the CSV. I remember having problems with it, trying to parse stuff with Perl.
Yeah.
The libraries didn't exist.
The amount of command line Perl I used in my first job is absolutely astonishing. I mean, Perl minus PE. Does anyone else have that memory of starting a command like that? I think we've got most of the answers. In fact, it was not the CSV. That is definitely a data horror story, which many people can identify with, which is why I chose it. But I've never had a particular data horror story that ruined everything because of commas within a string. It was, in fact, the lost thesis, the second place. I do indeed have my PhD sitting up on the bookshelf up there, and I cannot find any sign of it in the servers of the university I went to. And it was before GitHub was a big thing. So we had all of our internal, I think it was, I want to say Subversion, some kind of Subversion repository that was just local. When those servers went, everyone forgot that there was stuff on there that was useful, and they are just gone. The file database is nearly true. It wasn't COBOL in my first database job. It was text files. My first job as a database programmer was to look at a database composed entirely of text files, which I always thought was mildly amusing. They were in the process of creating an Oracle database for it. But,
I remember that. It wasn't SRS, was it, at EBI?
It was Trimble.
Oh, yes.
I was a Trimble database programmer. That was my first job. Now, of course, called Uniprot Trimble because they've changed the name and rebranded halfway through my job there. And it worked really efficiently as a text file. I'm not knocking the text file based database structure. We just did a lot of those Perl regexes. There was a lot of that. But for the data we had, which was the format was the same as the EMBL format, which is modified slightly to work for proteins. And actually, it was a structured text file. So it wasn't so bad. There was lots of good things working with it.
Well, along the lines of that, I work very commonly with PIs in the building, and quite often they'll go, I want a database to do this. And if you're not careful, you end up developing a database, whereas what they actually really want is a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the, files are good and spreadsheets are good. And just the misconception sometimes of maybe what a database is means that you're coding up a relational model and you put your API on top, and it's a lot easier now. But really, I think that's one of the first questions I ask. Do you mean a database, or do you mean just somewhere that you actually want to put some records?
So I've kind of seen it from the other angle as well, where I've had researchers come to me, they've got themselves in such a mess because they've built a database, but it's a very elaborate file system. So they've got lots of deep hierarchies of folders and so on. And I saw one where they'd written a whole R-Shiny app just to be able to interrogate this file system database, and it was really starting to creak at the seams at that point, with performance and so on. But it's quite incredible how far they managed to push it.
That's very interesting.
There's I think there's some training that's really good. In fact, I'll put it into chat in a minute, which talks about how to create directory structures and file naming as well. I think that this will come around to some of the stuff I want to talk about with my horrors in a minute. But
I expect there's also an XKCD about file structures and directories. I feel I've read one before. I'll see if I can find it, but that's more of a trivial joke rather than a serious matter, Robert. So
the lost thesis, you're upset? Yeah, you've got it. You've got a hard copy, yeah.
I have the book. It's right on my bookshelf. But other than that, I have nothing.
I couldn't look at mine anyway.
I don't know anyone who's able to look at their PhD thesis after they finish their PhD thesis. No, it's just that there's like an appendix. I mean, this is old school, man. It was only like, actually, it was about 2010. I did my thesis after doing a job for a while, and I think a lot of people did. But even then, it sounds like it's not that long ago. But I had an appendix where portions of the code were printed out And I don't think anyone would do that these days. But that's all I've got left of the actual underlying stuff that underpins the thesis itself. But obviously my thesis is magnificent, isn't it? And so it doesn't need any underpinning.
Eva, your horror stories.
Thank you. So I went a little bit AWOL here. So instead of voting for which one is the truth, you guys are gonna have to vote for which one is the lie. I just want to make sure that everybody's paying attention. That's why is the change. Okay, so the first one, mega horror. Well, first, apologies, you have to suffer through this accent. I'm originally from Spain, despite living in the UK for over a decade. But we are a large team. We analyze multiple data sets from a variety of sources. We got a project that comes towards the end of data collection. All the metadata is in RedCap. It's a £1 million funded project. And one of the key outcomes we need to look at is a time course component in which we need to see how the patients evolve. But the only date logged in the system was the day of the first visits, and we don't know when the patients came into clinic, as those were not in a particular schedule. They will just come when they will feel poorly. So no way of tracking that down within RedCap. My second, a bit more positive, is for the last two papers we published, we were required by the journal to provide raw data, process data, and a complete working data analytic pipeline of the code to reproduce the results presented. And the third one, for one of our recent projects, we got a data dump with the data coming from a facility that generated the data, the metadata coming from the main researchers that is commissioning these things. And there were no common identifiers between this data, the quantitative data, and the metadata to marry them both. Also, bad samples were filled in another color instead of with an extra column to tell us when a bad sample was there. So those are my three horrors. Yeah.
Honestly,
we're
I could
looking
believe all
for-
of them, Eva.
Yeah. The color column. Yes, I get that a lot. So we're looking for one lie now, yeah?
One lie, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just pleased. As if, sorry, I found really amusing that throughout all the questions, the crowd is mostly voting what would be the most devastating sort of the three options.
It's funny. It's like, that's the one that really needs to be alive. That's what they're telling you. Although, you know, in practice, just presenting everything that you've done to create a paper isn't such a bad thing, is it?
Oh, it's not, of course. It's big, yeah.
I've been in a situation there where you've had to put a bit of hack together just to get something through because you're busy and you just sort of hack something and go, well, no one will see my code.
Yeah.
And of course, we need the code submitted.
Oh, well, yeah,
Yeah.
shame on code produce is a common feeling, but nevertheless important to share, regardless of the state of it, while it works. I think most of the people have voted now, and they are correct. Unfortunately, that's the lie. I mean, I wish that that was a requirement for most publications because it would make fair a reality instead of things we're trying to patch out.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's not the case. Like some journals, I mean, what they ask is quite sparse. I think I quite like what Nature asks from the authors. You need to fill in this detailed form in which you specifically said was the number of samples per different experiment, where is your code, where is your data, like you need to be more thorough. But that is as much thorough as I have seen, and it's still not standardized in any way. So for example, the amount of detail you provide in your metadata, nobody really compels you to adhere to certain minimum standards. With the code, it's the same thing. I don't think anybody really checks that things work properly. And this is something we discuss a lot in our journal clubs. So it's a shame, and it's something that I think we all have an option here to at least try to make that change whenever we are publishing, to try to make a conscious effort to make as many of these things available in the right way as possible. So that's something in our power, but is good in a way. And yet the unfortunate truth is that the other two are truths. So we had this more than £1 million project that is currently on standby, hoping that these nodes are in clinic as they should be. But you know, once things end, the resources to go back through nodes and systems, because especially when you have multi-site things, the multi-site studies, the systems in the NHS might not align, so it's not as easy to go and look for specific fields to fill in a database. So while it's not all lost, things are on a schedule and something like this happens and you lose it. So it's very important to design these things from the start with someone that knows what needs to happen in the data analysis stage. And the third one, unfortunately, is the bread and butter of the CBF. In almost every project, we need to handle something like that, in which samples are not matched, the color is used to tag problematic things or groupings, or something specific that is nowhere else logged, but it meant something to someone that generated the data, but never made it downstream. So those are things that we all need to work on, and but yeah.
I know it's crazy. It's even made the BBC News occasionally, you know, the fact that these genetic, especially gene names, would historically have odd characters in them, and it would throw off spreadsheets, and it would just, lots of data would get lost. I find it interesting. I'm doing with regards to the policies and what journals require, I find it very interesting. We have been trying in fair sharing to make the policy documents themselves a bit more fair by reading the documents and then providing attributes of the policies into their records in fair sharing. So what you can do is you can query fair sharing, give me all policies that require data availability statements, or all funder policies that require pre-award DMPs. And so we're slowly building this registry of metadata around policies to try to be able to perform these larger analyses over what policies are really requiring, how many mandate data sharing versus just suggest it or don't cover it at all, and this kind of thing. And I'm finding some really interesting stuff. And then with another grant we're on, we're trying to work with publishers to make sure they have a minimal set of information around the digital objects that are represented in the manuscript, and make sure that they're at least minimally reproducible. And it's hard because even though we're aiming for low-hanging fruit, there are lots of different journals out there, even within publishers, that have different levels of openness in their policies. And it's a really interesting area, but it's about trying to find whatever that lowest common denominator is in terms of making these digital objects within manuscripts available. I find it interesting, so thank you for sharing.
For us, that's a real source of frustration, is just the inconsistency across journals, and a lot of them have editorial guidance and guidance for authors on publishing data and so on. But even when that exists, so often it's not followed. We make a lot of data sets available. They're all published with a DOI, so they're citable, but the amount of times all we ever get is just an acknowledgement without that citation being used. There's a big culture change, I think, needed within the journals and the editorial boards to really affect this change, because until they start enforcing that kind of policy, it's a real challenge to get people to do the data properly, because there's not the incentive. You can't measure an acknowledgement.
Yeah, the incentive is really only available if you have correspondingly strong policies, and that's for funders as well as publishers, but that's where the majority of the stick comes in to get people to do it. And then the carrot comes in forms of reuse and attribution when other people can find it easier to use your data. I find it very interesting. And I every time we try to read through these policy documents, and I see Adam's here on the call today, who has helped me with this work, they're dense and they're hard to read. And we've had people say, well, you describe those policy records in fair sharing, so we can do this analysis, but aren't you concerned you'll get it wrong? And I said, well, yes, but I'm also concerned that the hundreds of researchers that are reading these policies are getting it wrong. And we do our best to represent it accurately. And then we work with those policymakers to try to check their records with us. And it encourages a sort of virtuous enablement of fair, because they'll look at our record and they'll say, yes, I'll claim it. But you haven't properly talked about data sharing. We mentioned something different. You've put suggested and we say required. And we say, well, you look at the text and your verb isn't really what it should be. It doesn't say must, it says should. And so it's about helping them reflect upon their documents as well as and help them improve, hopefully. But of course, we've had the policy registry for years, but it's only the past couple of years that we've really tried to expand it and try to use these features of it and try to get sort of feedback more. And so it'd be interesting to see how the space changes over the next few years.
For me, it would make a lot of sense to perhaps not put as much weight on what the journals ask, because there are so many, so varied, so different qualities, but to perhaps try to get a commitment from people that are at the that act as gatekeepers, like for example, service facilities on either data generation or data analysis, to sign some sort of concordat towards the commitment to adhere to certain minimum standards with a range towards something maximum. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the way to go. If we all agree that this is what good science is and what we need to be doing, and we sign that we will try to do it the same way that other concordats have been signed for research and development, for the technicians' commitment, and so on. There could be one about this, and we will all hold accountable each other. And once most universities and institutions are part of it, I think the weight of it all will change policy.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that there's the Open Data Concordat. I'm probably naming it incorrectly. UKRI has the Open Concordat on data. It's one of those combinations of words it's a bit like I'm getting the words in the wrong order. And I know that is a lot of British universities are aligned with it, but some of the issues there is that the Concordat is like strategies. Like, it's great if you share, but it doesn't really have practical implementation suggestions. And I know that there's work within UKRN to try to make it more clear what that means for universities within the UK. And certainly Adam is helping me right now to add a bunch more institutional level policies to fair sharing so that we can see what institutions are actually saying. Because I agree with you, Ava. I think that the more positive way to encourage change is to make sure the institutions are happy encouraging that change within their staff. I was talking to some people from Canada last week, and they're responsible for coordinating the creation of strategy documents within Canadian universities. But they're saying it's very hard for them to ask the universities to mandate things because their staff don't expect it. So the level of stringency of these initial strategy documents will be lower than some that are already existing within British universities, because at the moment, those universities in Canada aren't quite ready to start committing to this sort of mandating the mandatory language. And I find that very interesting from a cultural perspective. And I think it'll change, but
no, but for a change to stick, it cannot be mandated. It has to come from within, no?
Well, this is what I'm saying. The institution would mandate, say our staff are required to make their data fair and to publish in our institutional repository where possible, and to publish the requirements for access for sensitive data. That's the sort of statement that you get in a lot of institutional policies, because I've looked at a lot of them recently. But what they were saying about Canadian universities is not all of them will feel comfortable making that kind of statement. They'll just say, we think it would be a good idea for our staff to do these things.
Yeah.
And I
There's
just
some
find
stuff.
it's interesting. I'm not making fun of Canada. I think it's just
No, yeah, of course, it's something that you have just written now and it's
Yeah,
pertaining. Yeah, of
exactly.
course. Yeah.
There's some stuff in chat from Gemma Marston talking about how strong our institutional policies are, and that they're planning to mandate data management plans and sort of move to a mediated institutional repository as well. This is the way certainly my university is going, and I think when we did some of the chats with the fellowship, so part of the ELIXIR fellowship is that we organise meetings with between fellows and their data leads within their institutions, and certainly would say at least half were mandating data management plans with anything that's funded, including PhD projects.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So yeah, this is something that we're going through at the moment. So in answer to Gemma's question on institutional policies, so we are updating our institutional policies on data management and data sharing. So the underlying philosophy for data sharing is as open as possible, as close as necessary. And we're combining this with a lot of training. So we are providing a lot of research data management training to our researchers, which is kind of split into two halves. The first is just good data management principles. And then the second half is how you apply FAIR to those principles. So we look at the whole data management life cycle from starting off with your data management plan through to where that data ends up in a repository. Sitting alongside that, we're also revamping our institutional data repository. So we're about to launch a new CCAN based repository for a lot of the data that doesn't have a good community repository. So yeah, sequence data that will go out to the EBI or the NCBI, wherever, for example. The same with transcriptomics or metabolomics data. But all of the other more sort of long tail kind of data that we have, so a lot of the field trial data that we have, soil data, where there aren't good community repositories, we're directing people to our institutional repository, partly because we have some curatorial support there. So we can do quality control over the metadata that's going in there to ensure that we have got an adequate description of there. We can do stuff to standardize the formats of the data. So, making it CSV, putting it into things like tidy formats for tabular data sets, those sorts of things. So yeah, that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. Nina was also mentioning something interesting that I think is common across many institutions as well, that while the will and the words, the nice words are there, the money is not put where the nice words are, no? So there is no support for infrastructure, no support for probably staff, system administration time, no? I'm just assuming from your comment, Nina, that will be the case as well. And I think that's a common shared problem as well. And the resourcing of data-related professions and roles is a spreading cancer. Sorry to be so. And it creates a lot of problems. I think universities that have invested in a strong, for example, RMD team through their libraries, for example, have managed to make this change happen towards implementing the DMPs, and then the DMPs help to some extent towards data sharing, although I still think there are big gaps from what you say you're going to do in the DMP and then the level of detail you put in the open repository, as there is no monitoring there of what goes out there and how well you can reproduce what was done with information that is shared without having to email the PI.
We had a meeting in an ELIXIR meeting a while back, and we were talking about incentives like the carrot stick, how people implement policy, get their data, make their data fair. And the popular suggestion from the room, I don't know if this will ever happen, is that, with every funding call then there is the idea that one project is taken at random and someone actually goes to look to see whether data has actually been made available in a way that's fair. Which certainly is a stick rather than a carrot. But even with the carrots, I think it's getting easier. I think Nina alludes to this, is that when you've got the infrastructure in place, it's a lot easier for people to do it. I mean, I find it very beneficial to, you know, teach from the point of, you know, early career research and PhD student on how to manage data, because then it becomes entrenched in the way that people produce data and then share their data as well. Got some nice stuff from Adam Partridge as well, talking about around policy and fair sharing. I know Adam's worked with you, Alison, on the fair sharing champion program.
Yeah. I mean, we also did the Dash stuff together. I mean, the Elixir Dash, the UK Dash stuff, which was awesome.
Shall I show you my horrors?
Yes, please.
So in my division, one PI's local RAID storage failed and they lost 17 terabytes of data. I have worked with a PI who hadn't stored primary data, thinking they wouldn't need it. They couldn't publish without it. That is a common theme coming out. Okay, third one, for Robert.zip. Robert is my name. Is the most common file name on my computer from PIs giving me data. They are all possible. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've heard instances of everything, all of these happening. People have got it right, the common file name. So this is one of the things that is not well appreciated sometimes, is that a file name, as soon as it leaves the computer, its intended process, you've actually lost that connection between how that data is actually produced and what the actual data is. And I think this kind of comes back to something I put into chat already, is there's some really nice training around how to name files and how to organize directories and name directories so that they can associate some sort of metadata with the data file that they've got. But this I see all the time, and it kind of it's just one of the aspects of the job, I think, that people come back to you and say, oh, that data set I gave you 6 months ago, can we have a look at it? And you're going, what data? But we have a system in-house now, which is our data cataloging. So any piece of data I have and any analysis that I've performed, and I've had this in place for 10 years, but certainly we're trying to roll it out across groups now, is that each group keeps a spreadsheet of the data they actually produce with the provenance that's associated with it as well. And there's something I use all the time. In fact, I'll put it into chat when I finish speaking. Is a set of YouTube videos that was produced by someone in London, so Sandra, at Queen Mary's, and she works with data catalogs and large consortia in organising data. And she's done some really nice YouTube videos, 3 of them, on how to build a data catalogue. So I'll put that in as well. But it's interesting about the primary data keeps coming through. I think there is certainly a problem sometimes. Certainly used to be when people get data from a facility, they don't always know, sometimes because I don't think they're told that they need to keep hold of primary data, otherwise they won't be able to publish at the end. And this first one I wanted to put in terms of the lost storage, is that a lot of universities do provide good replicated storage now, but sometimes there is still a culture of people having data locally and requesting their own data storage solution on a data management plan or within costs, and not really looking to see what the university is actually providing. Good. Do we have anything from the floor? I think, does anyone want to ask any questions? We've got stuff going into chat.
We've had a couple of data horror stories put into chat. Anyone wants to talk about?
So we have the policy, we have the staff, but literally no one responsible for providing data infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the costing thing is definitely something that is a problem for everybody. And one of the ways that we've tried to address it at Rothamsted is basically by putting an overhead onto new proposals. So we're developing kind of a menu of services which range from just basic research data management support at more of a consultancy level through to more bespoke arrangements where we are providing a lot more hands-on data management. So whether it will be sustainable in the long run, it is yet to be seen, but it's one of the ways that we are trying to maintain that data stewardship resource internally.
It's certainly going the right way, isn't it? I feel quite encouraged. I mean, it's just having visibility as well. Just, you know, the term data stewards has sort of appeared, but maybe it's a little old school now, but 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't know what a data steward was. And what I wanted to do was put that link in. I've lost my about data catalogs. There was just a YouTube video I mentioned, so I'll just put that into chat now. This is something I use all the time. It's great. We're coming up to the end of the hour. I've certainly seen horrible stuff today in terms of the data stories, and I'm glad a lot of them were actually lies, but I think we all know these things can happen. But thank you very much, everyone.
That was good fun.
Coming up.
Yeah.
This is the first time we've tried this format. Certainly other projects do this sort of format, but certainly making us approachable towards people is a good thing.
Thank you. Before we end, maybe we can ask the audience if they know what topic they would like to cover in the next one. Sorry, this is inappropriate, but I thought it might be a good opportunity.
Anyone have any ideas?
Yes, so audience, what would you like a panel to discuss next time, or you to get involved? What would you like?
Would anyone like to come? We could actually open the floor out larger, but then you're sort of doing hands up, hands up. There's a certain protocol you follow with doing a panel.
It might be they're all shy about proposing new topics, Ava.
Oh, that's a good one. So Antonio says the best thing I've seen
nice.
done in data stewardship. Oh, yeah, that would be nice.
Mary, I'm glad that we could help you with your experience of our data horrors helping you with your.
Yeah.
I like that idea though, Ava. You're right. Antonio's idea.
There was something I was thinking along of the same lines, is to invite people on and they talk about the tools that they actually use in data stewardship, because I learn about stuff just through conversations. You know, a good piece of training they found, or a good website fair sharing they found. I think that would be a nice thing to do as well. Yes, Nicola, the Christmas special, because they're present to us all. So we have BBSRC talking at the next meeting, which will be the first Tuesday of November. We have one of the portfolio managers, Richard, speaking to us, and we also have a fair pilot project that we're talking about in December. So what I'm trying to do is start to populate the data, populate the website now, get the recordings on, and get the PowerPoints up as well. So that's my job for this month, to do a revamp. But no, good. Thank you, panel. Thank you, everyone, for turning up.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing and inviting.
Yeah, thank you.